James won't admit it, he refuses to believe queer theory destabilizes normativity, gender binary, and the nuclear family. James blocks the truth, smears people who try to show him, creates an echo chamber for himself to reinforce his fantasy. He used to believe in something, what happened? Mills for liberty. Gnostic sex cult, building his own world. The Gnostic sex cult, unhinged from reality, totally lost in what can we do? But mock him relentlessly. It's not a Gnostic sex cult, James. No, it's not. Stop lying to your audience. No, it's not. It's not Gnostic, James. Grip Mary Nardini tells us queer liberation means the annihilation of capitalism. Catch up, James. Whiteness means capitalism. Queer theory hates capitalism. Whiteness means capitalism. Queer theory hates capitalism. Whiteness means capitalism. It's all about capitalism. Everyone knows it's capitalism. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, James. It's capitalism. Whoa. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, James. It's capitalism. It's all about capitalism. Everyone knows it's capitalism. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, James. It's capitalism. It's capitalism. To pocket all that money from the mills for liberty. The left hates capitalism, but James won't admit it. He refuses to believe queer theory stabilizes normativity, gender binary, and the nuclear family. But James blocks the truth, smears people who try to show him, creates an echo chamber for himself to reinforce his fantasy. Is to believe in something. What happens for liberty? Gnostic sex cult, building his own world. The Gnostic sex cult, unhinged from reality. He's totally lost it. What can we do but mock him relentlessly?
Hello, hello, fellow Gnostic sex cultists. Happy Tuesday. I hope everyone's having a great day. Welcome to The Cult. The Cult is a show that I stream live at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday on YouTube, on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, and on Rumble, where we do deep dives into the far left. I show you things that are going on that no one else on the internet is showing you. And that's why my audience, the people who tune into my work, either the Monday through Friday streams or Socialism Saturdays, which is on Saturdays at 6 p.m., we know more about what the left is doing than anyone else on the internet. We know more than the commentators. We know more than the pundits. We know more than the so-called experts. And that's because for a couple hours, 6 days a week, we sit our asses down and we actually watch the left in their native environment. We watch their trainings, we watch their presentations, we watch their book launches, we watch their classes, we watch the things they teach to each other when they think that people like us are not listening. We know more about who the real leftist activists are in the country than anyone else. We know more about the organizations. We know more about the people pushing every crazy idea like critical race theory, gender ideology, attacks on parental rights, environmental justice, universal health care, all of these things. Because we actually listen to them. What a novel idea. And yeah, I mean, can you guys believe it? It is the 200th episode of the show. I started the cult last year. And you know, we do 5 days a week. Usually, sometimes I take days off and stuff like that. But We have managed to hit 200 episodes of the show. I'm really proud of that. I hope I brought you guys some great content. Obviously, some of you are sticking around and some people come in and out, but that's all right. Thank you for that, Maria C. Naruto, happy 200th episode. Carlin, I found a doozy of a training before going live. Well, send that over to me and we'll take a look. I found a bunch of doozies of trainings today. I mean, it's like every single day, I'm finding like just more and more and more of this stuff. And so every time conservatives say, we're winning, I'm like, then what's all this stuff? Do you even know this is happening? Because what we find consistently is, James Lindsay just the other day started talking about how queer is a political identity that needs to be separated from the LGBT. Remind me, guys, who was talking about queer as a political identity that needs to be separated from the LGBT over a year ago while James Lindsay was still calling everyone groomers? Who was doing that? Someone remind me? Because I was like, because people send me his tweets all the time. Of course, me and most of my community are blocked on Twitter, but we have ways to get around that, of course. Who exactly was saying over a flipping year ago, wrote a whole article about it on the Substack, did several streams about it, that queer is a political identity that needs to be separated from the LGBT, that queer and trans are not the same. You don't need to be gay to be queer. Excuse me, you don't need to be gay or trans to be queer. Who was saying that over a fucking year ago? Yeah, that was me. That was me. I know we're all stumped about that. That was me. Could it be me? Yeah, it was me. And listen, guys, I wasn't just saying it on these streams. I wrote articles about it. I was screaming about it on Twitter. I was like, everyone has got to wake up. This is so much worse than you think it is. And James Lindsay was just running around saying, stop sending kids to college and calling everyone a groomer. So if you want to be ahead of the curve, this is the place where you're going to be ahead of the curve. And it's really not because I'm doing anything magical. I'm literally just sourcing leftist trainings and I'm showing you what's happening in the real world, because James doesn't focus on what's happening in the real world. James focuses on what happens in conservative spheres on Twitter, which is so far behind what the left is doing. Not even funny. Murphy's Pool, thank you. This is a bet I had with Bot. I bet she couldn't guess the nickname I had when I was young, and she did. Oh, that's a great bet. See, I love when you guys do these bets and I get super chats no matter who wins. And speaking of which, guys, sadly, nothing remotely controversial is not happening tonight and may not happen ever again. And so if you guys have nothing remotely controversial super chats that you are kind of saving until later, you can just send those to me. You can just send them to me. Like, I don't mind. This is against my will. So if you want to send that to me, you can, I'm just saying, you don't need to save that for later. You just, send it in right now. It's okay. It's okay. Bot says, this is for a bet I had with MP that he couldn't guess my nickname and he did. Again, I love these bets. I love them. So let's see. Not the Bee posted an article today about queer food and missed the point. I commented and referred people to How to Speak Socialist. Yeah, isn't it funny that Not the Bee, which listened to James Lindsay and removed my credit from Socialism Saturday when I was specifically talking about this, isn't it funny that Not the Bee does not understand what queer means? Isn't that funny? They had all the information right in front of them. Literally all they had to do was look. All they had to do was watch the fucking video. All they had to do was look at the tweets of people in their replies who are trying to tell them what this means, and they couldn't do it. Are any of us surprised by this at all? No. And this is why conservatives are losing and will always lose, because they don't effing listen. Oh, you were referring to that Judaism training? I found a lot of interesting trainings today. Hang on, let me show you guys. Let me get my other window up. Shoot, I have so many windows up right now. Shoot. Where's my other window? Where is it? Where is my window where I was looking at these trainings earlier? Hang on, is it here? No. I found a ton of good stuff earlier. And I really hope it hasn't made its way, like I accidentally clicked off on it or anything. 1 sec, let me just... Not that one. Not that one. Not that one. Well, okay. I guess I'll just have to find them later because I actually did find a bunch of streams earlier. I found a couple about Judaism. I found a couple about the gender binary. There's a lot of stuff out there. I actually found like a couple. Actually, let me just pull up my Twitter. I can just show you because I actually tweeted them. Those aren't what we're going to watch today, but they're interesting. They're on the list. I didn't want to do Jewish stuff 2 days in a row because like I really don't want to turn into that channel that just talks about like Jewish stuff all the time. Because that's honestly not what I care about. Like I actually don't care if people are Jewish, like in real life. I think the topic's interesting. I just don't care. So let me show you what I found earlier. So we found this one. Look at this. Check this out. Beyond the binary, gender expansiveness in Judaism. This was like last week at some temple. So that's on the list to watch this week since so many people were arguing with me about it last time. And I also found this one. Queer Judaism, LGBT activism, and the remaking of Jewish orthodoxy in Israel. I found some other stuff too. Always making lists of trainings and stuff like that. Anyway, let me show you what we are going to be watching today, though, because I thought that this was just like a little bit easier. Just a bit. Bit to do. Not that one. Not that one. Not that one. This one. Here's what we're going to be watching today. Check this out. 2 months ago, there was a debate at MIT, but an hour south from me in Cambridge, Massachusetts, one of the country's elite colleges. You can see this debate was sponsored by the MIT Free Speech Alliance. The MIT Free Speech Alliance and the Adam Smith Society are pleased to co-host our third Oxford-style union debate at MIT with the following proposition: resolved that sex is biological and binary, and gender identity is no substitute for sex in social policy. The debate was held on April 17th, 2024. It included an MIT professor of philosophy, some political philosophers, some other people. It was moderated by the former head of the ACLU and NYU Law School. And, you know, we know, because we hear the left talk about this all the time, that one of the primary things the woke left is working on right now is abolishing the gender binary. And so the fact that there is even a debate about this, the fact that this debate is even happening is pretty amazing if you think about it. MIT isn't necessarily an Ivy, but it's like definitely at the level of the Ivy League schools. This is an elite college. And they are actually taking the time to have a real, serious discussion over if the gender binary is real. Like, that's amazing. What does MIT stand for again? Like, what type of academics is MIT known for? Is MIT like a little woo-woo liberal arts college that's just like out in the woods somewhere? Can someone remind me what exactly do people go to MIT to study? Yeah, MIT is about STEM. MIT is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's about math, it's about engineering, it's about science, it's about stuff related to computers. Those are the types of people that go to MIT. Yes, MIT Press is connected, and the MIT Press is a whole other problem. Yeah. So we're talking about one of the most elite math and science and engineering colleges in the country. And they are actually entertaining the idea that the gender binary isn't even real. That's pretty incredible. And so, on the face of it, the fact that this debate is even happening is proof of the effectiveness of the left. As a reminder, actually, let's just do a pop quiz. You guys tell me, why do we care about the gender binary? Why is the left Why is the left trying to destroy the gender binary? Pop quiz. Why is the gender binary a target? Let's see your answers in the chat. While you're doing that, please make sure you do mount the like button, guys. Remember, mounting the like button lets YouTube know to recommend my content to more people, which would be really, really rad. I would appreciate it. Pop quiz for the chat. Why do we care about the gender binary? No, this is not the correct answer. Wrong. Big old buzzer, bro. Wrong answer. Wrong answer. We care about the gender binary because the left believes that capitalism created the gender binary, which is men and women. They believe capitalism created it because it puts men in the workplace where they get all the money and have all the power, and women in the home doing the unpaid labor of raising the nuclear family. That means the gender binary literally created the nuclear family. If the gender binary falls, the nuclear family falls. If the nuclear family falls, because then capitalism falls, because this is all about capitalism. We care about the gender binary because the existence of the gender binary upholds capitalism. That's why the left wants to destroy it. They want to destroy it because they want to destroy capitalism. The binary is the basis of family, and family makes capitalism work. Because if we don't uphold the gender binary, capitalism is over. Exactly. Nope, not to confuse the population. Wrong. By the way, guys, if you're getting a wrong answer, I don't want you to feel too bad about it. What I want you to do is take in the information that's being given to you and just process it and listen, because you're not hearing it from me. You're hearing it from other people. The gender binary is their pathway to destroy the core family, thus destroying capitalism. Capitalism created the gender binary, which upholds the nuclear family, which upholds capitalism. To get rid of the nuclear family, which upholds capitalism, if they destroy the gender binary, they win. That is true. If they convince enough people that the gender binary is not real, and again, the gender binary just means men and women. That's all it means. There are currently not even colleges. There are currently high schools in which upwards of 40% of students believe that they are non-binary, that they're gender queer, that they're gender fluid. This is how the gender binary gets destroyed, through the indoctrination that's happening in the public schools to convince kids that this is not real. And they start teaching kids this when they're 5 years old. That's what Drag Queen Story Hour is all about. Drag Queen Story Hour is not about sexualizing children. Drag Queen Story Hour is about teaching them that gender is a performance, that you can change your gender as easily as you can change your clothes. That's what that's about. Because if they implant that idea in the population, they win, we lose. And it is really that simple. Lots of correct answers in the chat. I'm not going to go through all of them now, but want to congratulate everyone who did get a correct answer. You know who you are. Lots of correct answers. So if you guys are looking for more information, look in the chat. See, this is the type of attitude I like. No, it's no problem getting a wrong answer, guys. We should be a lot less afraid of being wrong. I've been wrong about tons of things. But if you get a wrong answer, take in new information and then process it. And hopefully you come to the conclusion. Do I think Nick Fuentes is gay? No, I don't. No, I don't. No, I don't. I think only retards think he's gay. Judgmental Lizard says, listen to Carlin. She is 100% right. Don't be tricked by these psychos. Hey, I love it when people say I'm right. Thank you for that. Well, I mean, but you got to be more specific than just saying confusion, because it's not really about confusion. It's not about confusion at all. It's about indoctrination. But I understand why you said that, but you've got to be more specific. All right, so this is what we're going to be watching today, guys. It's about 2 hours long, so we're going to be sitting here for a minute. So make sure you have some snacks. Make sure you have a nice cold beverage. It is a warm-ass day in New Hampshire. I don't know what it's like where you guys live. And why haven't we been mounting the like button yet? There's a shocking disparity between the number of people who are watching right now and the number of people who've mounted that like button. While I wait for more mounts of the like button, let me just show you some other stuff. As a reminder, do please make sure you are subscribed to my Substack, which is Carlin, KARLYN.substack.com. I released a podcast this morning, the Actively Unwoke podcast. I actually have 2 podcasts on the Substack. The free podcast is just labeled podcast. And if you go there, you'll see it on the main page as well. This is the Actively Unwoke podcast. You can find this podcast on all major podcasting platforms, whether that be like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any of the other ones. And you can listen to the episode today if you want to understand what the term Queers for Palestine means, because there still seems to be a lot of confusion about that. I recorded a podcast today explaining it. I also wrote this article yesterday if you prefer written stuff. The podcast is different than the article. It's like additional commentary and stuff like that. But definitely refer to those resources if you don't understand why the heck the left is saying queers for Palestine, then you don't understand the left as well as you think you do. Again, no harm, no foul. But the reason I say that is there is a very, very clear reason why the left is saying queers for Palestine. It does make sense. You just have to understand their logic. If you want to learn more, head over to the Substack. You can find that information there. And if you guys appreciate all the work I'm doing, I am trying to get 100 new paying supporters on the Substack this month. That would really help me out. We, of course, always need to remember that I'm grassroots funded. I am funded 100% entirely by you guys who value what I'm doing in terms of breaking down this content, spending all the time researching this content, spending the time explaining this content. I want to get this content in front of as many people as possible, but I need your help to do that. The more you guys sign up for the Substack, the more I'm able to accomplish. So when you sign up for the Substack, that gives me money that I can buy tools to get the content out there more. That gives me more time that I can go and reach out to groups. That gives me resources that I can use for potentially like advertising and stuff like that. So that's what's going on here. Okay. I need your help in order to be able to do this. Keep me in business by spending $8 a month, $80 a year, especially if you come and you enjoy the streams and stuff like that. I would really appreciate it. So you can find that over on the Substack. Of course, when you do that, you do get access to a variety of perks. You can always find your perks in the Unwoke Roundup email. And what you do is you scroll all the way down to the bottom. And underneath this red box, you are going to find 2 links to 2 supporter calls that I do every single week. We do them on Mondays at 7 p.m., Wednesdays at noon. You can come talk directly to me. You can meet other people in the community. That's available as part of your supporter perks. You also get access to the supporter Discord. If you are a supporter and you have not yet joined the Discord, please do so, because I'm going to be reworking some stuff in the Discord. I'm going to be putting some opportunities together to really get involved in different areas of what I'm doing. And so now is the best time to get in it. You will find the link in the email right there. You can also come join us for a writers group in the Discord every Thursday. You can come join us for movie nights every Sunday. What are we watching this week? The Patriot. Jennifer, of course, does movie night on Sundays. We are watching The Patriot this week because July is Patriotic Movie Month in my supporter Discord, apparently. And so we'll be watching a bunch of patriotic movies. You can get access to that in the supporter perks section of the weekly newsletter that I send out. Another way to support the work I'm doing is by heading over to the Unwoke Art store, where you're going to find some cool new merch. I've got 3 new t-shirts that are up right now. Check this out. First off, we have the Unwoke Wiki t-shirt. I do a new Plague Doctor t-shirt every single month as a limited edition, and I was kind of inspired by Trump's black on black MAGA hat, and I did a black on black Plague Doctor shirt because I think that looks sick. So you can get that as a limited edition in the Unwoke Art store. We do a new Plague Doctor every single month. Another thing you can get is this t-shirt that I made. I'm doing this new series in the store just called The Horror Show because I'm into horror movies and I like that sort of thing and I like that sort of vibe. And this is the era that I grew up in, okay? And so what I've been doing is I'm taking hater tweets about me and I'm reimagining the hater tweets that I get into cool merch that I can just then sell to monetize the haters. But I love this design. I think this is so cool. This was someone saying that I'm a bottomless pit of dark. And so I made a bottomless pit of dark movie poster. Now the real question you want to ask is this person up at the top? Are they about to jump into the pit or are they climbing out of it? Could be read either way, right? LOL, Candace Owens said science is a pagan faith. Candace Owens is off the chain. Candace Owens is creating a lot of problems for herself, but I'm here for it. I'm living for it. I like what she's doing right now, but I don't know. Well, I guess we'll see. Anyway, that is in the store. There's going to be a lot more t-shirts to come. And then I just launched this one last night for fun. This was a design just entirely based on the mood I was in yesterday. And quite frankly, the mood I'm still in today. And I was like, F it. I'm just going to put it in the store because I think it's a cool ass design. It doesn't mean anything other than I think it's a cool ass design. It's something I wanted on a t-shirt, a skull, smoking a cigarette, wearing a pair of sunglasses. This is so my mood. I can't even tell you guys. So I know all this stuff doesn't directly do commentary on woke culture, but sometimes we just got to create stuff that's cool, right? Sometimes we just got to create stuff that's cool. I was absolutely not high when I made this shirt. That didn't happen, bot. Don't spread any rumors about me on the internet. That didn't happen. Anyway, if that stuff's not your speed, I do have a bunch of other just kind of like normal stuff in the Unwoke art store. You can just access the t-shirt section up at the top. You'll get the Real Marxism one, the 4 Goals of the Woke Left, Socialism is Gay. We've got some Animal Farm, some Orwell stuff, 1984. We've got all sorts of cool zine-inspired t-shirts. This one's inspired by They Live. Like, there's so much cool stuff in the store. And of course, all purchases do go to support the work I'm doing. And I really do appreciate it. Let's check in on that like button. All right, we're making some progress on the like button. We're making some progress. Still got some progress to go, but that's all right. Anyway, let's get into this debate, guys. We do have a couple hours. We have a couple hours together here, and I'm sure we'll have lots to say about it. All right, we are watching a debate from MIT. Is sex binary? Let's watch what happened. Fast.
So this debate series was started in response to a cancellation event a few years ago in which a visiting professor's presentation was canceled over personal views he had expressed, which had nothing to do with his academic work. This was kind of a signal that MIT had lost its traditional tolerance for divergence of viewpoints.
Self-awareness.
And had also
Excellent.
lost its ability to engage in respectful dialogue over controversial issues. So we and many of these co-sponsors started this debate series to model for the MIT community how to engage in civil, respectful discourse over issues which could be controversial and maybe engaging. And also how to do that in a respectful way. And you're going to see that here this evening. So I'd like to point out that already these debates, plus the many programs that MIT themselves have introduced in response, have already helped to improve the civility of the dialogue that goes on in campus, events of the last several months notwithstanding. Okay, now it is my honor to introduce our moderator for the evening, as she has moderated all of our debates so far, Professor Nadine Strawson. So, hold it. Let me explain all the reasons why you need to be applauding. So Professor Strawson is past president of the American Civil Liberties Union. She's a professor emerita of New York Law School, and she's currently a senior fellow with the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. She writes frequently on this topic, and earlier she had released a book which is relevant even today, obviously, titled Hate: Why We Should Resist It with Free Speech, Not Censorship. And last year, she released the title of Free Speech: What Everyone Needs to Know. Now, when Professor Strawson is not writing about free speech, she's crisscrossing the country speaking on this topic. And she is here tonight in that same spirit. So, Professor Strawson, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Wayne, and thank you for the kind introduction and for the great work that you and MIFSA have done, both here at MIT and with very significant ripple effects far beyond MIT. Regardless of our views about the specific topic of tonight's debate, our debate raises general concerns about academic freedom, as Wayne alluded to. Too many people have argued that the issues we're addressing, along with the other issues that have been the focus of MIFSA's debates, should not be subject to debate at all, even in an academic setting. And polls, including polls that have been conducted by FIRE and by College Pulse, show that many people don't dare to discuss these important topics, even on campus, for fear that they will be accused of causing harm. So solely by participating in this debate, all of the participants, although they will obviously disagree on the debate topic, they all agree that on the very important point that cannot be taken for granted, namely that these issues are not beyond debate. So I'm going to use my traditional prop throughout these debates. Don't get too excited or annoyed, depending on your views about Donald Trump. As this cap declares, we all want to make John Stuart Mill great again. And I want to thank the Stanton Foundation, which was giving away copies of On Liberty. They very generously.
Higher education elites are so fucking cheesy and cringe. I just want credit. I worked in higher education for 10 years. You have no idea how much of this stuff I've heard. It's, oh God.
Said you may take multiple copies, so please do that. And Mill, of course, powerfully explained that we must debate even, indeed, especially our most cherished ideas and beliefs. And what better place to do that than MIT, which is a world leader in science and certainly deserves to be a world leader in scientific inquiry, open inquiry. And by the way, as a token of respect for MIT, I'm again following my tradition of wearing your school colors, red and black. Thank you again for having nice school colors. Okay, now I'm going to introduce very briefly our distinguished debaters. For more information about their impressive accomplishments, please look at the MIFSA website. Starting with our two affirmative team members, they are both philosophy professors. One is from right here at MIT, and the other is from...
Hang on. Why is Steve wrong? If Steve spent more time listening on my streams, he would know he's wrong about this, but why is Steve wrong? Steve says Rachel Levine is in hot water now. This week, Biden administration has officially come out against surgeries for kids. So fucking what? Why does this make no difference at all? I don't mean to put you on the spot, Steve, but I feel like I've told you to start listening a little bit better and you just don't. And I really want you to, bro. I really want you to. Why is this wrong? Why does this mean nothing? Why does this make no difference at all? Because you don't need surgery to be non-binary. The point was never transitioning the kids. The point was not cutting off the healthy body parts. The point was not even sterilizing the kids. All those might be features. They're not really, or benefits, but they're not really the primary point of what's going on. The point is to abolish the gender binary, and you do not need to have surgery to abolish the gender binary, so it means nothing. Surgeries are not required for kids to be queer. In fact, they make a great effort to say, you don't need to get surgery to do this. You don't need to do anything to do this. You just need to declare that you are. It's about transforming, not transitioning. They've taken over the schools, and this isn't going to help anything. You don't need surgery to be queer. I really hate to burst the bubble of people that don't understand this. I really, really do. But I've been screaming this for over a year, and so you'll have to excuse my lack of patience with people catching up. But you don't need surgeries to be queer. Surgery, well, it's not even that, D. It's not even that, although it does do that. But that's another good point that I hadn't actually thought of. It upholds the gender binary. Socialists don't care about surgery. Non-binary is the goal, not to transition children from one gender to the other. Kids are still getting brainwashed, so that doesn't matter. Queer is performative. Exactly. See, now I know Steve there's a smart guy in there. I know that. I don't waste my time on dumb people, Steve. You keep showing up even though I tell you you're wrong all the time. So I do have respect for that. They use these words to confuse normal people. If anything, surgery implies Gentiles do make... Fair point well made, Bill. Fair point well made. Transing kids is to help them transcend the gender binary, not transition. Getting surgery and becoming a man or a woman would be transnormative. I mean, it works either way, doesn't it? Anyway. Yeah, so that's why it doesn't mean anything. And again, listen, okay, is it a good thing that the Biden administration is against transition surgery for minors? Yeah. Being against transition surgery for minors is going to prevent a lot of kids from going through a lot of pain that is unnecessary. And so I'm in favor of that. Don't get it twisted, because someone's going to clip this out of context and be like, Carolyn's in favor of gender surgery for minors. No, I'm not. I've never been in favor, and that's just not true. It works either way, though, doesn't it? Like, but what I want people to see is the bigger picture of what the left is doing. And the bigger picture of what the left is doing, quite frankly, has nothing to do with surgery. It has to do with the mentality of the populace in teaching them that the gender binary isn't real. That's what the real goal is. And no matter what's going on in the news, no matter what people are talking about, no matter what is going viral on Twitter, that goal doesn't change. It's always the same.
The other side of the world. So first, Alex Byrne, an MIT philosophy professor and the author of Trouble with Gender, Sex Facts, Gender Fictions. And second, Holly Lawford-Smith, a philosophy professor at the University of Melbourne in Australia and the author of Gender Critical Feminism. And our negative team, Dr. Alice Drager, a historian, journalist, and Guggenheim Fellow, who is the author of Galileo's Middle Finger.
Hang on, we got a super chat from Tayton. Thank you, Tayton. It was expected, though. All the European countries already went the route of no surgery for minors. The USA is always right behind them. Yeah, I mean, it's a good thing. It's a positive thing. I like that they're doing this. I'm just saying that, like, you know what it is? It's kind of like when a couple of states passed anti-CRT laws, and then all of a sudden conservatives were like, well, nothing else to do here. We won. We got the anti-CRT laws. They're going to save us. And still, critical race theory is taught in schools in every single state where there are so-called anti-CRT laws, but everyone thinks that the problem was solved because we got these laws. It's done. We win. We're winning. But nothing really changed. Nothing really changed. They just stopped reporting on it. Nothing changed. They were still teaching the same shit they always were. The media just stopped reporting on it. And so you tell me now the Biden administration's coming out against these surgeries. Well, good. That's a good thing. That's a positive thing. We'll probably end up saving kids from, again, a lot of pain that they don't need to go through. That's a positive. But does it change anything? No. Not in a way that's going to impact most people. And the left is just going to keep on going and going and going and going and going. Because the surgeries were never the problem. The surgeries were a symptom of the problem. The surgeries were the symptom. They weren't the root cause. And still, there is just an absolute ignorance on the right of what the real problem is because they don't listen. Thank you, Saltwater Pearls. That's really, really nice of you to say. I really do appreciate that.
And Erin Kimberly, an RN and interim co-director of FAIR in medicine and community engagement director of the LGBT Courage Coalition. So a welcome to all of our distinguished debaters. Next, I'll briefly outline the debate format. Each speaker is going to have an 8-minute opening statement alternating between the affirmative and negative teams. Each opening statement will be immediately followed by 3 minutes of cross-examination by a member of the opposite team. Then each team will have 5 minutes for rebuttals. With the aid of our timekeeper, Spencer, and my gavel, I'm going to strictly and fairly enforce the time limits. When time is up, I'll pound the gavel, say time, the speaker must then stop. I'll allow a few words to finish a sentence, but that's it. And then we'll turn to audience questions. And we have 2 floor mics, 1 on each side. You should feel free to line up behind them to ask your questions. So now it's time for our first opening statement from affirmative team speaker number 1, 8 minutes.
Thanks, Nadine. So thanks to the MIT Free Speech Alliance, for arranging this event. Holly and I are delighted to be up against Alice and Aaron, two people we very much admire, in addition to Nadine. If it turns out that there's not as much disagreement between the two teams as you were hoping for, don't blame the Free Speech Alliance. Believe me, they tried, but it turns out some people are not prepared to defend their ideas in public. So the proposition before us is that sex is biological and binary, and gender identity is no substitute for sex. In social policy, it's got three parts: sex is biological, sex is binary, and the gender identity bit. In my opening
That
8
was
minutes,
actually-
I'm going to concentrate
I was
on...
actually telling that guy basically just said, like, they asked other people to do this debate and they didn't want to do it. Did anyone else catch that? That guy was like, if there isn't as many fireworks as you might think, that's because, I mean, he didn't say this, but he said this. They asked other people to do the debate and no one wanted to do it. So now you get us. That says a lot. That's actually a positive thing.
On the first two parts, leaving the third part mostly for Holly. So before getting into the details, I want to stress one thing. The first two parts, sex is biological and sex is binary, are obviously about biology. The third part, about gender identity, is obviously about social policy. Holly and I, and this is very important, are not taking the biology textbook as a guide for organizing society. We are not saying sex is biological and binary, so of course the military should be stationed outside bathrooms or anything like that. The point, instead, of discussing the first two parts is just to get clear on some basic facts about sex and clear up some common confusions. If we're wrong and sex isn't binary, perhaps because there are 5 sexes, that wouldn't spoil our argument for the third part, that gender identity is no substitute for sex in social policy. So you shouldn't think of the first two parts, sex is biological and binary, as some kind of essential premise in our argument for the third part. Okay, so let's turn first to sex is biological. What does that mean? How could sex fail to be biological? Well, Holly and I take sex is biological to mean that sex is not socially constructed. Sex is not, as Judith Butler writes in Who's Afraid of Gender, established by various cultural and social means. Nothing like that is true.
A direct rebuke to Butler on the side that's supposed to be arguing against sex being binary. Yo, is this whole exercise going to turn out to be a massive white pill? Are we actually going to leave this stream happy and hopeful? Like, is that actually going to happen today? I mean, everyone knock on wood. Knock on wood right now. This might be too good to be true.
According to our team. There's much more to say here. I'll leave that for the rest of the debate. I'll spend most of my time on the second part of the proposition. Sex is binary. Now, here things get a little tricky because sex is binary is understood in 2 ways, leading to people talking past each other. On the first understanding, sex is binary simply means there are exactly 2 sexes or reproductive classes, male and female. That is, there are exactly 2 sex boxes, and I've actually brought them with me here. The other one.
No, like, aren't we witty?
So
Aren't
on
we
this
witty?
first understanding of sex is binary, anyone with a sex is in one of the boxes. Now, you can see that this understanding of sex is binary doesn't mean that everyone is in exactly one box. Perhaps there are some people who don't have a sex and who are in neither box, or perhaps there are people who are both male and female, and so who are in both boxes. Okay, so I can be quick defending sex is binary, understood as there are exactly 2 sex boxes. I doubt that Alice or Aaron want to defend the view that there are fewer than 2 sex boxes or that there are 3 or more. Last time I looked, the biology textbooks were still talking about males and females and hadn't added any new sexes. The textbook account of males and females in terms of small and large gametes, sperm versus eggs, has stayed the same for well over a century. Okay, so that's the first way of understanding sex is binary. What about the second way? Well, keeping it simple, you can think of it as adding something to the claim that there are two sex boxes. Yes, there are two sex boxes, but in addition, everyone is either in this box or this one. Put another way, no humans are sexless, neither male nor female, and no humans are hermaphrodites, both male and female. Now, our position on this second understanding of sex is binary is a bit nuanced. So what we want to say is that there aren't any clear exceptions to it. That is, there are no clear cases of sexless humans or humans who are both sexes at once. And I should say that if we cast our net over organisms in general, then we can easily find sexless ones and hermaphroditic ones. For example, the yeast used in baking is a microorganism that doesn't come in male and female varieties, and a garden snail is a hermaphrodite, both male and female. Now, here the discourse about the sex binary takes a very regrettable turn. People with so-called intersex conditions, certain kinds of disorders or differences of sex development, DSDs, are paraded around at this point. And I should acknowledge that we're talking about human beings here, some with serious medical conditions, who, of course, should be treated with respect. Bogus statistics are often mentioned. Intersex people are as common as redheads, are nearly 2% of the population, and so on. The context of these debates is usually something to do with transgender people, and it can't be emphasized enough that transgender people, for the most part, are physiologically typical at birth and do not have a DSD. DSDs have nothing to do with any debates about transgender issues. Anyway, the fact is that if you examine DSDs, you'll find that people with them almost always readily slot into one of the two reproductive categories. Alice and Aaron might push back here, and of course you can ask us questions about that. People can describe themselves however they want, but intersex.
Did I mix them up? This is the team that is in favor of sex being binary, and the other team is opposed to it. Maybe I mixed them up. Maybe we took the white pill too early. It's okay. They're still doing good.
Is an extremely misleading word since it suggests falling outside the sex binary. The number of cases we could have a almost certainly futile debate over is minute, 1 in tens of thousands. Okay, so let me now quickly say something about the third part of the proposition about sex and gender identity. So point A, gender identity has become a very obscure term. It didn't start out that way. For our team's purposes, it can simply be interpreted as gender self-identification. That is, what sex you say you are. So what we're claiming is that sex self-identification, sex self-ID, can't replace sex in social policy. Point B, although we think that sex is sometimes better than sex self-ID, that doesn't mean it always is. Generally, people should be allowed to associate as they see fit. If you want to have a dating app open only to those who self-ID as female, go for it. But if you want to have a dating app only for females, you should be allowed to go for that too. Okay, so I've used most of my time defending the second part of the proposition. I distinguished two understandings of that and tried to add some nuance, and now I see I basically have 10 seconds left. And anyway, nuance is not the best debating tactic, so I'll just say it, sex is binary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask our timekeeper, Spencer, once you start holding up the time card, can you just keep holding it up until you get to the next one? Thank you so much. So now a negative team member has a 3-minute cross-examination.
Yeah, this is the negative team.
I think Aaron and I both have a few questions, but I thought I would begin with asking you, so how do you define sex?
Well, the textbook definition of sex is in terms of gametes size. To a first approximation, you're male if you have the body plan, which produces small gametes, and you're female if you have the body plan that produces the larger gametes. That is the textbook account of sex, which, as I said, has been the same for over a century.
Yes,
You can find it back in the 19th
everyone
century.
boo for the negative team.
And a follow-up question, do you have any concerns with the idea of sex being policed in social spaces?
Oh, sure, yes. You mean like policing bathrooms or something like that?
Hmm?
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe I should pass this one over to Holly, who's more more interested in the enforcement, I suppose, than I am. But yeah, sure, of course.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I don't think there should be. I don't think there should be sex inspections outside bathrooms. I mean, for example, you know, these social norms do much better when people just naturally follow them, and there's some tacit convention to follow them.
But if you were to allow people to decide for themselves, that is essentially what we're talking about with gender identity, right? So you're comfortable with the idea of people choosing what sex they identify as?
No, the point is that, look, for some cases, so there's a case in Australia, which is in the courts right now, called, believe it or not, Tickle versus Giggle, which is all about whether it's legal to have a dating app that's open only to females, which can exclude people who are male but who self-identify as females. And I think our position is that should not be illegal to have a dating app of that sort. If you want to have a dating app that's open only to those who self-ID as females, so it's open to both males and females, then that's fine too.
So you said that no one is born without a sex. What would you make of a person born with gonadal agenesis?
For example, Swire syndrome.
As one example, but
Yeah.
a person born with no gonads.
Well,
We're
there was
unfortunately out of time,
street
so
gonads.
very brief answer.
Yeah,
please.
so just very briefly, yeah. So people with Swire syndrome have XY sex chromosomes. They have typically a uterus and fallopian tubes with assistance. Some of them can actually get pregnant. That's that's an excellent case. It's an extremely rare case, by the way. It's something like 1 in 50,000 or something like that. But that's one of the.
Hang on, got a super chat from Richard. Thank you, Richard. Once again, you shine a light on what needs to be known. I've woken up to this and trying to help others as well. Your tweets and videos are critical. Hey, thank you, Richard. I really do appreciate that. Guys, please make sure you are following me on Twitter. Now, sometimes I tweet nonsense, and I want everyone to be prepared for that. But oftentimes I do also tweet good things as well. I tweet videos. This stream, of course, is tweeted out every single day. So if you guys can help me share my stuff on Twitter, that would be really, really great. Just ignore the stuff you don't like. Just ignore the stuff you don't agree with. We don't have to agree on everything. All right. Twitter can still be fun. But if you guys can help me share the important stuff out there, I would really appreciate it. And thank you, Richard, for the super chat. Yeah.
Those cases that we think that
and
you could
thank
have
you over to Maz Darks on Rumble. Happy 200th stream. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Reasonable disagreement about. It's certainly not a clear case of someone without a sex.
Thank you very much. Negative team speaker 1, 8-minute opening statement.
My orientation is that of an historian of medicine and science who has tracked centuries of human attempts to define sex. I've also spent about 20 years advocating for the rights of children and adults born with intersex conditions. And my goal in preparing these remarks has been to center on intellectual humility and also compassion for individuals. The chief points I want to make are these. First, that sex development is in fact complex and varied. And sex development is actually a lifelong process, one that many of us manage medically. I'm reminded of the latter point every time I insert an estradiol capsule up my vagina, which I do twice weekly by prescription. Second, that arguments in favor of understanding sex as simply binary are often inconsistent in implementation. The same people who tell us sex is about gonads or gametes tell us sex is really about hormones when they arrive at a sports stadium. Third, we can both believe in biology, as I do, and make reasonable social policies without having to go back to 19th century concepts of true sex. and we should. My fellow feminists would do well to seriously consider whether they want to go back to Victorian definitions of womanhood. Politically, gender has had a good long run as a tool of liberation for women.
Oh, liberation.
So sex development is complex and varied. There are more people on the planet with intersex conditions than there are Jewish people. And I don't think either population should be treated as ignorable rounding errors in the development of social policy.
Maybe it would be better.
Aaron was born with ovotestes, a combination of ovarian and testicular tissue. That's one of about 3 dozen known conditions of developmental variations we might call intersex. Some people are born with a combination of ovaries and testes. Some people are born with gonadal agenesis. No human makes both sperm and eggs because you can't make sperms and eggs at the same time. The hormonal cocktail is required for one is different from the other. But it's nonsensical to say that gamete production is what makes us male or female. I've stopped making eggs, but I'm surely female. A male typical or a female typical child whose gamete producing ability is permanently thwarted by trauma or by chemotherapy is still rightly recognized as male or female. Back to sex variations, genetic mosaicism means you can have XX in some of your cells and XY in others. A male can be born with XX chromosomes due to translocation of the SRY gene. A person who is female typical in terms of her genitals and brain development can be born with XY chromosomes and testes because she lacks androgen receptors, a condition called androgen insensitivity syndrome, or AIS. Children with these conditions are diagnosed much earlier than they used to be. And thankfully, they're often told the truth much earlier than they used to be. Please consider what it will mean to a girl with AIS and her family if you decide she is definitionally male. I know from women with these conditions that in places where hostile sex definitions exist, they may be subject to existential crises every time they go to use a public bathroom. No one, including trans and non-binary people, should have to go through an existential crisis to pee. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH, is an inborn condition that can result in a wide variety of sex developmental pathways. Among those, it means a genetically and gonadally female child can be born looking like a typical boy. Years ago, a man who was 19 called me because his doctor had told him to call. He was a boy, raised a boy, had male typical interests and a girlfriend. He had just found out he is in fact a genetic female with CAH and ovaries inside. His doctor told him he should consider a sex change, and I asked him if he felt like a woman. No, he said, he was a man. I told him, I don't let my ovaries tell me what to do, and I don't think you should let your ovaries tell you what to do. CAH, as severe as this, requires medical attention, but it does not require a sex change. Advocates of a binary sex worldview seem to recognize what we might call brain intersex. I'm speaking here of the well-documented phenomenon of males who are behaviorally female typical from a young age and vice versa. In a number of traditional cultures like Samoa, such children are socially crossed over in their gender identification to maintain a sense of a two-sex world. Classes like weight and age classes in serious sports. But let's be clear, these would be socially constructed categories of biology, like weight and age classes are. Third, we can both believe in biology, as I obviously do, and make reasonable social policies without having to go back to 19th century concepts of true sex, and we should. These policies can be based on what we recognize as legal fictions, categories we create to manage competing interests. Most importantly, we can police behavior rather than biology. If the problem is sexual predation, or the problem is obnoxious attempts to eclipse women's right to abortion, or whatever, let's deal with those problems. Let's deal with behavior, not police identities. Most importantly, let's recognize the central problem we have. Our brain stems are always needing us to characterize others by their sex, because a part of us is always thinking about sex, who we might have a potential sex partner and who we might not. Finally, I want to note that it is surprising to me to hear so many people who believe, as I do, in sexual liberation, seeking to essentially create categories that will be policed. And so many people who say race should never matter in government policy, wanting the government essentially to police our bodies sexually. I would suggest we be very careful before we go there.
Thank you. Now a 3-minute cross-examination by an affirmative team speaker.
Alice, thanks so much. First question, how many sexes are there?
I think that depends on the time and the place and the way you're categorizing things. So
No,
as a historian, I
wrong.
would say that's a question that's answered within particular cultures. I don't know why you feel the need, Alex, to say that we have to have boxes.
See, you know, this is what these people do. This is what socialists do. And we know she's a socialist because she's using the term liberation, and really only socialists use liberation. So she's hiding. She's one of these like historians that probably has their office right next to the goddamn sociology department or something like that. And so what these people do is they try to make it seem like we're just trying to make the world safe for intersex people. And, you know, there are some exceptions and there are all this stuff. And don't you just want everything to be nice to everyone? And you know, science really says that there are these exceptions, there are these abnormalities. Well, she's not acknowledging that it's like an abnormality. It's not the norm. And we should probably be making policy based off the norm. That's not to say you can't create like exceptions and reasonable accommodations with people who have an abnormality that has nothing to do with who they are. But I want people to see the trick that they're playing, because she's like, you know, there are all these problems that exist, and most people don't know these problems that exist, and these problems are real for real people. Okay, yeah, fine, those problems are real for real people, but that does not mean there is an infinite number of genders that exist dependent on the society that you're in.
There are categories, there are features of sex which clearly exist on a spectrum, including, hormones, including gonads, including many things like breast tissue, phallic tissue. I don't think it's really sensible to say biology tells us this, therefore that is what is absolutely true. If you know anything about science, and, you know, I was raised in philosophy of science, you know that science is a process of learning new things and discovering new things and recategorizing things. And historically, that's happened over and over again. That doesn't mean biology is not real. What it tells us is that at different social moments, we categorize sex differently depending on the social need.
Okay, so you at least agree that some humans are male and some humans are female.
Some humans have all of what we consider to be the male typical patterns, and some humans have all of what we consider to be the female typical patterns. Yes, they line up. Most people do that.
No, that wasn't my question. My question was you do agree that some humans are male, and you agree that I'm male, for example, Holly's female.
I'm not arrogant to think I'm in charge of defining male or female. So the way I answer that—
Male and female, I just asked you to—
Hang on, Alex. The way I answer that is by saying, according to the definition, yes, that biology and medicine say, here's what you have if you're male. Most people that we call male have that, and they have a similar situation for females. And in fact, most people fall into one of those two categories, what I've in my own work called the standardized male category and the standardized female category.
So you mentioned congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is one of the most common DSD. Do you think that XX individuals with CAH are female or not?
I think they're genetically female, they're gonadally female. Whether or not they end up genitally female depends on the level of their androgens in terms of their development. Whether or not their brains end up female typical or male typical also depends on the level of hormones within prenatal development. So studies from CAH show us pretty clearly that when a female is heavily androgenized in terms of her prenatal development or his prenatal development, much more likely to be masculine in terms of interests and behaviors, more likely to go into male typical professions, more likely to be sexually attracted to females. Okay. That tells us that hormones have an impact on gender identity development, sex development, and also sexual orientation.
Okay. That wasn't actually the question I asked. I didn't ask whether they were hormonally female or gonadally female. I just asked whether they were straightforwardly female.
I think life is more complicated than two little boxes. I think science knows now that sex is much more complicated.
How much time do I have? Oh, 1 minute. Okay. So let's take asparagus plants. They come in, at least according to the botanists, male and female varieties. So to take a male asparagus plant and take me and a garden snail. So we've got 3 organisms here, and we're all male, right? I'm just as male as the asparagus plant, and the snail is just as male as I am. Snail's also female. So what do we have in common?
I would actually think about what you don't have in common, which is that snails don't play elite sports. Asparagus don't need to go use the bathroom.
No,
and so to me, it's not particularly interesting, to be honest.
But why
I'm
Why
sorry.
do you think biologists would classify these three very different organisms? I totally agree that for the snails, sport is not the issue.
Very brief
as
answer,
male.
please. We're out of time.
Okay.
Thank you,
You can have a
Nadine.
very brief answer, Alice.
I don't think I need to answer.
Okay. Now, opening statement by
Wow, look how
affirmative team speaker 2.
dismissive.
Okay, so as Alex said at the start of his remarks, we take the question of whether gender identity is a good substitute for sex in social policy to be logically disconnected from the question of whether sex is biological and binary. So even if it turns out that there are 3 sexes or sex turns out to be socially constructed after all, our arguments for sex, not gender identity will still go through. Social policy in the context of this debate refers to anything public where sex has historically been the basis of organizing people and where there is now some pressure coming from trans activists to shift to gender identity instead. Some examples include prisons, sports, domestic violence refuges, counseling services, changing and fitting rooms, hospital wards, schools, shortlists, prizes, festivals, and the collection of census data. Surveys in my home state of Victoria, Australia, monitoring the effects of the COVID-19 vaccine, collected demographic information on self-identified gender rather than sex. That's a fairly straightforward case where gender identity rather than sex is being used in social policy, but shouldn't be, given that vaccines are not likely to have differential effects according to gender identities. There are 2 ways for us to approach this policy part of the resolution. One is to argue wholesale for all spaces at once, and the other way is to go space by space. I think both strategies are useful and offer different considerations, so I'm going to say something about them both before taking the space by space strategy. On the wholesale approach, we'd argue that gender identity is no substitute for sex because sex is always, or at least usually, a better basis than gender identity for social policy, no matter which aspect of social policy we are concerned with. We could take that strategy by giving you an argument for why female-only spaces like gym changing rooms, services like rape crisis counselling, and provisions like a dedicated female artist residency matter to female people and advance the equality of the sexes. We could then talk about safety, privacy, fairness, shared experience, freedom of association, and all the ways those distinct values justify the continued provision of sex-separated spaces. And we could take that same approach in talking about gay and lesbian spaces or men's spaces, arguing that whenever there is a question of using sex or gender identity as the basis for offering spaces, services, or provisions, sex wins. The other strategy, and the one we'll take tonight, is to go space by space. The School of Mathematics and Statistics at my university, the University of Melbourne, late last year advertised a position as follows. Applications are invited from suitably qualified candidates who identify as women, in brackets, cis or transgender, then it continued, non-binary or gender diverse. This is to use gender identity rather than sex in the social policy area of anti-discrimination exemptions for hiring people from underrepresented groups, specifically the university hiring of mathematicians. Has there been discrimination in mathematics against trans women or non-binary and gender diverse people? If not, if the discrimination has been against females, then sex would have been better than gender identity for this particular job advertisement. But consider, on the other hand, a scholarship for female philosophy graduate students in the case that there is a passing trans women student who's faced many of the same barriers as female students have faced. Perhaps in that case, sex would be the wrong basis for the social policy of dedicated philosophy scholarships. Although note that does not necessarily mean that gender identity would be the right one, because as Alex said, we're taking gender identity to mean sex self-identification alone. And passing as female and being treated as female are more than merely self-identifying as female. Some spaces are easier for one side or the other to claim. In my view, sports are the best case for sex and bathrooms are the best case for gender identity. But I'm quite confident that we've all heard more than enough about sports and bathrooms. So I'm going to focus instead on the less discussed case of gay and lesbian spaces, because this is an interest that Aaron and I have in common, and so hopefully can productively disagree about. So for gay men, this might mean something like a physical space like a sauna, For lesbians, it might involve something like a lesbian speed dating event. If inclusion should be decided by gender identity rather than sex, then the gay sauna should admit females who identify as gay men, and the lesbian speed dating event should admit males who identify as female
good
and
argument.
lesbian. A group called the Lesbian Action Group in Australia last year applied to the Australian Human Rights Commission for an exemption to anti-discrimination law in order to be able to hold a series of cultural events for lesbians, including one on International Lesbian Day. Because in Australia, sex in law and social policy has already been so thoroughly replaced with gender identity, even where the word sex is still used, the group used the phrase lesbians born female in their application to make it absolutely clear that they were seeking the right to have events for lesbians understood in the sense most of the rest of the world still uses. And their application was rejected, among other reasons, because it was exclusionary of trans women who considered themselves to be lesbians. In their decision, the Australian Human Rights Commission wrote that restricting access to a public event in the manner now proposed would amount to unlawful discrimination under the Sex Discrimination Act on the ground of at least gender identity in the provision of goods and services. The Commission suggested that excluding men in order to advance sex equality and excluding heterosexuals in order to advance sexual orientation equality might both be lawful. So the issue was the exclusion of males with lesbian identities, who the Commission refers to as transgender women who are lesbians. So the issue was the Lesbian Action Group wanting to use sex, not gender identity, as their grounds for inclusion. So which should it be? What lesbian means, just as what woman means, is now contested. Does lesbian refer to a fact about sexual and romantic attractions or a feeling about who one is?
I've seen stuff coming out of like the colleges where they basically say that you are a lesbian if you are someone who does not date men. So let's just play this out. And I saw this in the context of people talking about like non-binary lesbians. I was like, how can you be a lesbian if you're non-binary? Because lesbians are women who like women. But the current like leftist definition of what a lesbian is anyone who does not date men. So if you are a non-binary man, if you are born a man and you identify as non-binary, and you are dating another man another person born a man who also identifies as non-binary or who identifies as a trans woman, you are a lesbian. So conceivably, by this definition of lesbian, I guess the point I'm making is you can literally have two people who were born with dicks dating each other. And if neither of those people identify as a he, him, that would make them both lesbians under this definition. Is everyone tracking? Yes. And all of you straight men who were born men and no, actually, gay men, sorry. All gay men are really lesbians trapped in a gay man's body. Everyone following? Straight men are now the only people no, hang on. Yeah, straight men are now the only people who are lesbians. are not lesbians. I can't even keep it straight.
The answer determines whether sex or gender identity is the appropriate grounds for inclusion for a cultural event held on International Lesbian Day. I can't hope to settle the matter in the mere seconds I have left. But I will say that even if the word lesbian changes its meaning, there will still be plenty of the people it used to refer to around, myself included. Part of the purpose of cultural events for minority communities is to facilitate connections between people who have something in common. So it would make sense to let those people get together in public with others like them and without others not like them. And this means whichever side ends up winning the word lesbian, the state should still permit some same-sex attracted female-only gatherings. It should be sex, not gender identity, in at least some cases, even if we want there to be events of both types.
Thank you. Now, a 3-minute cross-examination by a negative team member.
My first question is, how would you implement sex-based policy if it weren't for gender identity?
How would you implement sex-based policy? I mean, I think, as Alex said in response to Alice, this is a push on what the social norms are. So I'm not sure if implementation is even the right word. I think we're trying to make the strongest case we can that sex is still relevant, and we want people to get behind that. I mean, I guess the implementation is made relevant to my last example, that the Human Rights Commission would need to at least acknowledge that it's appropriate sometimes to grant these exemptions when they're applied for. But actually, I would have thought the more sensible outcome is that they're just counted under the permanent exemptions that exist anyway for all minority groups. So I kind of find the whole situation in Australia, including the Tickle versus Giggle case, really baffling that that's even having to go to court. But that's how far things have gone there ideologically.
I think you might want to answer the same question again.
You can.
It's okay, I'll move on. In terms of lesbian spaces, do you feel, just for clarity, do you feel that that lesbian spaces should include trans men or trans women?
Trans men. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and again, this is not we're not settling a blanket rule for all society, for all events. In Australia, we're fighting for the right to be allowed to have events for lesbians only, or female-only social media apps. One app out of all of the apps that are trans-inclusive, to be able to have one app that is trans men inclusive rather than trans women inclusive when it's a women only space. So it might just be, maybe we talk past each other slightly if it's should that ever be allowed? Should that always be the thing that we have? We just want to be allowed to have some events that are lesbian events. And I think there should be allowed to be one social media app at least that is really female only. In Alex's sense of female, female only. Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the problematic behaviors that occur that trigger these kinds of things and why we can't respond to those behaviors as problematic, as opposed to having to appeal to what is kind of an essentialist identity.
I mean, I'm all for essentialist identities, I have to say. I don't think there's a problem there. I think it's been kind of weaponized, but it's there's not a good argument for that. If your question assumes that the reason lesbians don't want males in their gathering is because something bad happened one time with that guy, I don't think that's the reason either. I think they have every right to want lesbian-only gatherings as they understand that. And I have experience with older lesbians in Melbourne, who kind of, feel really strong.
Who would have ever thought? I mean, seriously, who would have ever thought that people would put up this much of a fight in order for women who want to have sex with other women to be able to hang out and get to know each other? Truly, does anyone actually want to go hang out with lesbians? No offense. No offense. I know lesbians love me, and because they all think I'm a lesbian, but I'm not. But I know lesbians love me, but I, as a general rule, don't like lesbians. I find most lesbians to be insufferable. I don't want to hang out with lesbians. So Heidi is an exception. Heidi's a good lesbian. We like her. But why are people fighting so hard to go hang out with lesbians? Of all people, who would have ever thought this would be the case?
Only about their communities, really don't want male people in those communities. It's not about an incident or some bad behavior that could be dealt with separately. It's about being able to say no to males in those spaces. For them, it's a lesbian feminist boundary. They feel really strongly about that, and I feel strongly about that on their behalf.
Time's up. Thank you. And now we'll hear an 8-minute statement from negative speaker 2.
So I'm going to focus on definitions. because there are two competing definitions of gender identity, one which is political and one which is evidence-based. To prevent cross-contaminations of meaning, I'm going to give these two models different names. The political definition I will call a disembodied model, which is an invisible internal feeling. The evidence-based definition I'll call an embodied model, which is a self-perception of sex. Now, I can't say that I'm shy about playing a fool. I do over on Twitter all the time, but I would be a village idiot to argue that an invisible internal feeling is a reasonable replacement for material reality. However, I think a strong case can be made for an embodied model which integrates material reality with its psychosocial meaning. Since both definitions of gender identity apply to me and to my small peer group, of which lesbians who are among the first women to become trans, I'll use my cohort as an example through which to build my argument. Everyone in my peer group would have met the diagnostic criteria for childhood onset gender identity disorder, as it was called then. We were observed as gender nonconforming from about age 2 with varying degrees of cross-sex self-perception. As adult swapping stories, it was well understood that one of the things that we shared were testosterone-producing conditions like PCOS, CAH, or in my case, an ovotesticular DSD. Most of us had a natural crop of facial hair and had lifelong male typical interests and occupations. I worked out for myself that my DSD, sexual orientation, and masculinity are all interrelated. No one in my peer group was at all confused about our sex. The challenge for us was to integrate our masculinity into public life. We could rarely go out into public without being harassed. And even within the gay and lesbian community, we're often brutally accused of being self-hating and mentally ill. I disagree. There's well-established research demonstrating the impact of testosterone on female development. It's been tested in labs, giving rats injections of testosterone at certain stages of development, then introducing them into a social environment where they demonstrated male typical sexual and social behaviors. Were those rats self-hating, mentally ill sellouts? So with this snapshot of who we are in mind, let's look at the two competing definitions of gender identity. The Canadian government defines it as each person's internal and individual experience of gender. It is their sense of being a woman, a man, both, neither, or anywhere along the gender spectrum. A person's gender identity may be the same as or different from the gender typically associated with their sex assigned at birth. And then they go on to say that it's entirely unrelated to sexual orientation. This is what I would call a disembodied model. Anyone can simply declare man, woman, both, neither. Why stop there? Cat, dog. This definition is entirely contrary to my self-perception. My DSD, sex, sexual orientation, and masculinity are entirely related. As such, for the past 17 years, I was already protected under law, under sexual orientation, freedom of expression, and sex. So I prefer the following embodiment model. In the 1960s, professor of psychiatry Robert Stoller coined the term gender identity in context of researching how all people come to understand our sex and its meaning within a social context. He identified 3 key variables in this cognitive process. We could think of these as 3 glass lenses stacked on top of one another so that we see through them all at once. And those 3 lenses are biological sex, cultural context, and other biological factors, such as the impact of testosterone on female development. If one of those lenses becomes cloudy, it complicates the entire view. Most kids who experience a conflict in their self-perception grow up to be gay and typically reconcile with their sex once aware of their sexual orientation. When I was working in a clinical setting, most of the youth requesting hormones were lesbians. And I wasn't at all surprised to find that many of those girls were driven to change variable number 1, their sex characteristics, because they saw no hope for changing variable number 2, their culture. By helping them to understand how the 3 variables interact and by developing their capacity to navigate their social systems, many did a U-turn on wanting to change their bodies. This model is also helpful for working through ethical dilemmas and public policy. I'll give you an example. Caster Semenya is an Olympic level sprinter from Africa who won a gold medal in the female category. Before it was discovered, she has a DSD called 5AR2D and therefore high testosterone levels. When developing policy, the IOC decided that she could compete against women if she lowered her testosterone levels. Critics started calling Caster a man and demanded her removal from the women's category altogether. So let's think it through using Stoller's model. Variable number 1, biological sex. 5AR2D only occurs in males. Her chromosomes and gonads are male typical. Variable number 2, cultural context. Caster was raised as a girl, and that's how she sees herself. That decision was likely culture influenced, since cross-sex assignment isn't the norm everywhere. Variable number 3, other biological factors. This is where I would place her DSD. The nature of 5AR2D is the underdevelopment of the male sex organs due to a lack of DHT. But you would have gone through a male typical puberty driven by testosterone. Based on those 3 variables, I would have told her that she's a woman with a medical condition that gives her an unfair advantage in women's sport. I believe this decision is one that she would find meaningful, since the rationale is based on, according to Stoller, the same 3 variables which informed her own self-perception. It would be an unnecessary harm to Caster to dismantle her self-perception, but it would be unfair to women for Caster to compete against them. Stoller's model of gender identity, rooted in both biological and psychosocial realities, is adequate for the writing of inclusive and protective policy. It provides us with an evidence-based tool for thinking through ethical dilemmas and conflicts of interest.
Now a 3-minute cross-examination.
Can I just maybe start by getting you to say a little more about the cultural context in the Stoller model? Is that sort of, does it mean something like what society is offering to people that have the things you described in the other lenses at a time? I mean, can you just fill that out for me a bit more so that I can start understand the proposal?
Sure. I think that could mean a lot of things. So, I mean, in the example that I gave, it was about societal, feelings about gender nonconformity or about sex differences, like bodily sex differences, which influences sex assignment. But it could be also societal responses to homosexuality and gender nonconformity.
I see. Okay. What do you think about the rule, if you pass, you pass?
You pass, you pass.
Yeah.
I don't think passing is really the issue.
Okay.
I think, I am female and I have a beard. So I don't think passing is the issue.
Interesting. So if you wanted to use female spaces, you would fail on that rule, but you think you should be able to use female spaces? Or how do you feel about using female spaces with this appearance? Maybe that's a more open way to ask.
It depends on the spaces.
Okay.
So in the case of, using your example, lesbian spaces, there are a lot of lesbians that are in relationships with trans men. A lot of us were in relationships with women, lesbians, before we transitioned. I don't think that should have to be disrupted because we start taking testosterone and grow a beard.
Yep.
So I definitely don't like the way that our own community has been ripped apart. In the case of bathrooms, I mean, because I know I do pass as male most of the time, I don't want to be disruptive to society around me and my community. And so I will personally use male bathrooms because I think if I were to walk into a woman's bathroom, I would make women feel unsafe. And I think if passing trans men can use women's bathrooms, then what is to prevent any man from walking into a woman's bathroom and say that they are a passing trans man?
Wait. He just said, I would not walk into a female bathroom because I don't want to make women feel unsafe. And then he was like, so what should prevent any trans man from walking into a woman's bathroom? And it's like, bro, you already just answered your own question. Now the left says you're not gay, just misled. I mean, that's one of the things that they're going to try to get rid of next is like all categories of gay and lesbian. We listened to an anarcho-communist thing on Friday about that, like explicitly.
That's the other side of the equation, right? It's like one thing is what do people with these DSDs or the trans experience want, what would be good for them or what would make them safe. The other thing is what does the public need, or what do women in women's bathrooms need to be able to do to keep themselves safe? And I guess that's the other side of the gatekeeping question, right? So Alice, at the start you asked, what's the implementation strategy, or do we want policing of these boxes? Yeah, I mean, in some cases we do, right? We want people in changing rooms to be able to keep themselves safe and so on. So yeah, maybe that's just something that we need to keep working out. Do you want to say anything?
Okay, thank you. So now it's time for rebuttals, and each side has a total of 5 minutes, which you can subdivide as you would choose, starting with the affirmative team.
Could we actually have a minute? I
Of
think
course,
we talked
of
about
course,
an email
of
having
course.
a minute to talk
We'll
with
take,
each other.
we'll take a minute to confer.
Can you just clarify, is this closing statements or is this another thing?
No, it's final, it's rebuttal or, yeah, it's rebuttal and / closing statement.
It's the 5 minutes final thing.
Yes.
Okay, it's closing statement. Yeah. Lucky I asked.
Yeah. I'll just wing it.
But this is
Should we
our-
start? Yeah, this is ours. So
okay.
I'll
2 minutes
start.
or something? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Andy?
I think this team wants a few minutes to confer.
All right, let me fast forward a little bit.
Okay, right. So I'll start and then Holly will finish. Okay, so let me just make a few remarks about sex, picking up on some things that Alice said. So one thing she said was, well, there are different kinds of sex. You can be hormonally female, chromosomally female, genitally female, and so on. And this terminology goes back to the psychologist John Money in the 1950s, who distinguished various layers of sex along those lines. But you shouldn't confuse these layers of sex with sex itself. So to be hormonally female is to have the hormonal profile typical of human females. To be genitally female is to have the genital configuration typical of human females, and to be chromosomally female is to have XX sex chromosomes, which is typical of human females. This is all very parochial to the human species. In the case of chromosomally female, for example, that certainly wouldn't apply to numerous other animals and plants. It wouldn't, for example, apply to a female crocodile. Crocodiles don't have sex chromosomes. Their sex is determined by temperature, not by chromosomes. And you can see that the way I explained what it is to be chromosomally female, namely having the sex chromosomes typical of human females, itself uses the unmodified term female. So the very explanation of these layers of sex presupposes some absolute notion of being male or female. And just on the chromosomal point, Alice mentioned XX male syndrome. This is a very rare condition, like one in 40,000 live births or something like that, where, well, it's not called XX male syndrome for no reason. These people are usually classified as males. I mean, they look very much like males. They have somewhat underdeveloped male genitalia and a male reproductive system, although almost invariably they are infertile. So these people are chromosomally female. They have XX chromosomes, but they're actually male. And that's because, as Alice mentioned, at least in like 90% of cases, a bit of the Y chromosome gets translocated onto one of the X's. And on, let me just make one point about congenital adrenal hyperplasia. So this is a condition where in the XX fetus, the adrenal glands produce much more androgens, testosterone, than usual, and so the fetus is virilized to a greater or lesser degree. Sometimes this can be a very serious life-threatening condition which needs immediate medical.
Have a good one, saltwater pearls.
treatment.
We'll see you tomorrow.
And if you look at the medical literature on this condition, XX individuals with CAH are invariably classified as female, and that's because they just have a female reproductive system. Okay, sorry, Holly. They have a standard female reproductive system, and generally speaking, virilizing a female doesn't turn her into a male.
He doesn't get it.
Right. So the female spotted hyena,
Let
for example,
the woman
is
talk.
more virilized than the male spotted hyena, yet remains
No one cares
a female.
about
Okay,
hyena.
I'll stop there.
Okay.
Holly,
I
I'm
just
sorry.
quickly think it would be good to say something about the state of the debate on this topic. It's so great that we're here. There have been a few debates before on related topics, and there's 3 that we could come up with, and 2 of them involve 2 people that are here on this stage. But none of them have involved the most vociferous opponents of the gender critical side. People who deny the reality of biological sex, people who think sex is never an appropriate basis for social policy, people who accuse gender critical people of bigotry, transphobia, hate speech. Some people with those views were invited to this debate and they refused. And I think this has to stop. So the excuse that the sex realist or gender critical position is beyond the pale, so that agreeing to defend the displacement of sex by gender identity is dignifying or legitimizing the gender critical position, can no longer be defended, could never be defended. Something is not beyond the pale simply because a small group of activists declare that it is. Something becomes beyond the pale as a matter of broad social consensus after a debate has thoroughly played out. And I just want to say the proponents of gender identity instead of sex in all cases need to step up and make their case.
Yeah, good.
Now, 5-minute rebuttal and closing statement by the negative team.
It would be interesting to know whether the fact that Alex took 4 minutes of the 5 minutes and only gave Holly 1 minute was more about sex than gender. So as not to be misread, I do want to say that Aaron asked me to give our 5-minute rebuttal. I think Alex is caught in a hopeless tautology, or a hopeful tautology. He basically keeps saying, this is how we define sex, therefore this is how sex is defined. It seems to be an endless loop in that way. Although, as my spouse often points out to me, tautology will never fail you. Holly seems to be talking more about gender identity than I think she openly recognizes. I think, I find a lot of points of agreement, but that's because you're talking about where people actually live. And you're not actually talking about what their gametes are, or what their gonads are, or what their chromosomes are, but rather at the place where they really are living and experiencing life. Sex is obviously not binary. We don't have to name a number of sexes to recognize that sex doesn't come in 2 simple categories.
Oh my God.
Nature provides us lots of things in the world, and then we decide to impose categorization upon it. That doesn't mean biology is not real. It just means that our attempts to clearly categorize things that
Hang on. I want people to really listen to this and think about what this means in the context of what we listened to last Friday. Okay? What she said is nature okay, well, let's just listen. Hang on. Again.
Have to name a number of sexes to recognize that sex doesn't come in 2 simple categories. Nature provides us lots of things in the world, and then we decide to impose categorization upon it.
Nature provides us with lots of things in the world, and then we decide to impose categorization on it. Anytime you impose categorization on something, what socialists would call socially constructing, that's what social constructs mean. It means you are imposing categorization on something. Anytime you have a social construct, according to socialists, you also have what? A hierarchy. If you have categories, that's going to lead to a hierarchy. One being greater or lesser than the other, depending on whatever the social construct of that thing is. So what we listened to last Friday was an extremely advanced queer Marxist anarchist thought piece about if you have any categories at all, then that's bad. And so their framing of it is, even if you have the category of non-binary, that still acknowledges that the binary exists. So the mere existence of a categorization of non-binary is not good enough. We need to have no categories at all. This person has just said that nature gives us all these examples of things in the world, and then we decide to impose categorization on it. She is making the argument for no categories. Do you guys see this? Do you see how subtle this is? Like, we listened to that piece on Friday and we were like, this is a crazy anarchist piece and this is really complex and this is just like, it's really out there. I haven't heard a lot of things talking about that. And then all of a sudden, a couple days later, this debate at MIT pops up in which this socialist bitch is like, I don't even know why we have categories. Nature doesn't have categories. We impose categories on nature. I don't even know what we're talking about here. Do you guys see how subtle this is? That's crazy. That's crazy.
That doesn't mean biology is not real. It just means that our attempts to clearly categorize things that are not clearly categorized is about social politics. And that's not to say social politics.
Our attempts to categorize things that are not clearly categorized is about social politics.
Are not important. They're terribly important. And that's why humans for hundreds of years have attempted to come up with a simplistic binary definition of sex. And it keeps failing because nature is real. When it comes to the issue of the policing of sex, it makes sense to me that with regard to private gatherings, we can absolutely make categories and decide who's allowed and not allowed in those things. It's the point at which the government becomes involved with, for example, funding, with, for example, legal decisions, where it begins to become much more difficult. And here I'm reminded of the issue of free speech. You know, we can certainly restrict speech in private environments because we have the right to do so. But when the government becomes involved in that, we understandably become much more concerned about people being left out.
Nope. Wrong.
Sex matters.
Wrong. Steve, if you listen to the things that I say on the stream and you listen to the language, you would know. Pop quiz for the chat. Is this woman a socialist or not? Steve, I'm going to be really honest. If you keep coming into my streams and not listening, I'm about to get really fucking mean. I'm giving you more fair warning than most people get. Is this woman a socialist or not? Look in the chat, Steve. I'm not saying it. For those who can't see the chat right now, it is overwhelmingly saying that this woman is a socialist. There is literally no one saying that this woman is not a socialist. There's only one person saying that, and that person doesn't listen as well as he should.
But it's not the end of where we live. So if you listen carefully to what Aaron has described, Aaron describes what Blanchard traditionally called the homosexual transsexual experience. That is to say, a person who, from an early age, although being female, was gender nonconforming, not because Aaron decided to be gender nonconforming, but because Aaron developed gender nonconforming. When you end up sometimes with the situation that Aaron had, which is ovotestes and a masculinizing female identity, you have a situation where you're being bashed by people who think you're a gay man, and you're being bashed by people who think you're inadequately female.
Bashed? Who uses the word bashed? Did anyone say anything about the word bashed? Who uses the word bashed? I'm not saying it's like only exclusive to this group, but do you know what I think of when I hear the word bashed? in this context around gender, yeah, the Mary Nardini gang. Bashback. This woman's not a socialist. I'll eat my fucking hat. Who do you think the anarchists are? The queer anarchists? The anarcho-communists? Yep.
The same time. And Aaron has talked about how growing a beard was a decision made to avoid being harmed. So my point is that when we talk about sex and gender, we have to recognize that the decisions people are making are not being made because of their gametes or because of their sex chromosomes. They're being made on the basis of how they get to live. And that's, I think, where gender identity does important work for us, because it allows us to actually live in the spaces where we need to live. The decisions made, hopefully, are made mostly from a point of view of freedom, but often they're not. They're constrained by social reality. And what Aaron has described is what the real experience is of people who are gender nonconforming, people who are also of a sex type that doesn't neatly fit into the standard male or the standard female category. I think the best we can do is remain humble in the face of all of this variation and try our best to understand there are legitimate competing interests, and we have to figure out what to do with those legitimate competing interests. But there's not a simple solution to that. And the solution may look different in different environments. Thank you.
Now it's time for the audience Q&A.
Yeah, audience
So,
Q&A.
Let me lay out the procedures here. We have 2 microphones. If you feel comfortable doing so, please introduce yourself. You may address any question to your question to a particular team or to a particular speaker, but each team will have the opportunity to comment on each question, and we're going to confine each question and answer to 2 minutes total per team. So we can accommodate as many audience members as possible, and I'll just start with this side and alternate.
Question directed to Alice. Would like to say a couple words about Leah Thomas.
I'm sorry, I don't know who Rita Thomas is. Oh, Leah Thomas. Yeah. So here's a good case where I think it makes sense to begin to consider the possibility of creating hormone classes within sports. She obviously has had a male puberty, continues to benefit from male typical hormones.
This woman wants all sports to be created based on hormone classes. How stupid.
I don't really have a problem with the idea that she wants to identify as a transgender woman, but in those circumstances, as we understand sports, as women have spoken about how they want women's sports to go, they have indicated they feel that is an unfair advantage. I think it's the same thing with why we don't let 5-year-olds play with 20-year-olds in terms of soccer, right? We understand there are biological differences, but in that case, I think the logical thing to do is to create a category that is a biologically based category and to recognize we're doing it for social purposes, right? So we have age categories in sport, we have weight categories in some sports, we can have hormone categories in some sports. By the way, there's a swimmer who recently broke all the records in the 100-year-old age category. She is in fact 99 years old, but she's been given the awards in the 100-year-old age category because it's too complicated to divide people by their actual birth date. So the age in that swimming sport is determined by the year in which you were born, not the day on which you were born. That's a good example of biological reality being categorized in a way that makes for a social convenience.
Affirmative team, you get 2 minutes if you want it.
Yeah, could I just say something briefly about the hormonal classes? So I don't really understand what the proposal is in practice. So, of course, it's not your current levels of testosterone that matters. Indeed, sometimes over-exercising or taking steroids can seriously depress a male's testosterone levels. It's rather lifetime exposure, in particular, at puberty, but then this is essentially equivalent to having sex classes.
Lifetime exposures absolutely matter, but one of the things you need to understand is that The IOC and organizations like that already police hormones. So for example, in the male categories, if you have particular intersex conditions, you're actually allowed to dope with testosterone by getting what's called a therapeutic use exemption. So there already exists in the male category the ability to have a hormone class where you can actually legally boost your testosterone level as a male if you're recognized as having a particular intersex condition, for example, Klinefelter syndrome, where you produce low testosterone. The other thing to recognize, sure.
And since you had a second answer, does the affirmative team want to say anything else on that point? Okay, we'll go to the next question.
Hi, this is a question for Alice. So you've been asked, is there people who are male and female, or is there a set number of sexes? And you've given the answers, well, life is complicated. It depends on the time and the place. And I guess my question is there a kind of consistent model you could apply, like a spectrum or in fact, a set number of sexes to just what sex is? Or is it just this ever-changing kind of variable thing that no one really understands?
No, we
We
do
told
understand
you.
it, right? We do understand sex chromosomes better than we ever have before. We understand hormones better than we ever have before. We understand gametes better than we ever have before. What I'm saying is that different cultural groups will make different decisions based on the social need. And I'm not in charge of that. The way that sex is defined currently in medicine, for example, is it's defined, honestly, as a 5-sex system where basically they have males, females, DSD with ovaries, DSDs with testes, and DSDs with ovotestes. So, and that is based on science. Medicine today recognizes that there are different sorts of categories in that way, and that we have to figure out in those circumstances what is best for those children in terms of how they're raised. And that decision is largely based on the idea that we have to look at brains and figure out as best we can how gender identity will develop, which, as Aaron pointed out, is hormonally influenced.
Would the affirmative team like to comment?
Yeah, because now it sounds like you're not saying sex is socially constructed and has meant different things at different times. It sounds like you're saying sex is dimensional. It has these 5 or so dimensions, and science.
No, that's where medicine is right now.
What they are. Yeah, but that's not a socially constructed account of sex. That's a sort of, there's a real thing and we know what it is, and it's just slightly more complicated, or it's, it's got these 5 rather than the 1 gamete trajectory thing that Alex was talking about.
And it may come and go historically. The categorizations, they change over time. It's okay. Science changes. Medicine changes.
Is the
That's
5
okay.
dimensions now true or false?
It is true in medicine.
It's true in medicine now. Is that the view? It's true now.
When does sunrise happen? When does sunset happen? What we do is set a time on it based on where the light comes up. But we could just as well decide that we're going to set sunset or sunrise based on the bottom of the sun as opposed to the top of the sun, right? We're making decisions looking at the world about how we're going to categorize things.
But there's a world.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're out of time. Next question.
Hi, I have heard a lot tonight about the philosophical and biological and the academic, if you will, aspects of the debate. What I really haven't heard much about is how these divisive issues, the effect on society as a whole. And I'm thinking of just a couple of quick examples. Obviously, the trans women participating in women's sports. I see that 20 years from now, all records and championships in women's sports would be held by trans women. And isn't that going to other biological women and cause a lot of resentment? Another is prisons where any male prisoner can declare as trans. Any male prisoner can.
I mean, it's a little bit of a white pill for me. I'm going to be honest. It's a little bit of a white pill for me that all 3 questions so far have been deeply critical of this idea of abolishing the gender binary. They're all going right at this is at MIT, so it's a good thing.
Declare as a trans woman, get moved to the women's prison population, and it's like every week I see another example of whether it's rape or consensual sex, it's happening in the women's prison population due to the admission of the trans men. And third,
Can
and
you wrap
lastly,
up your question quickly, please?
yes, just one last example. I'm really concerned that the transgender craze, if you will, that we're experiencing these days may be partly or largely due to social contagion and trendiness with both parents and the children. And I fear that such a large portion of those teenagers, when they become adults, are going to regret that. And we're seeing it now with the detransition that's increasingly happening.
Thank you. Let's start with the affirmative team. 2 minutes.
That's my response.
Yeah, do you want to say something about prisons?
Uh,
I mean, I should say that, yeah, so one issue is, should transgender women be allowed into the female prison estate? But even if you think the answer to that is no, I would think you don't want to put them in the male estate for sort of obvious reasons.
you don't want to put trans women in the male estate or the female estate.
There could be a third estate.
Oh, yeah.
Here, yeah, the estates are not binary.
Well, I think in the
Because-
UK they have a wing of the male estate.
Transgender wing. Yeah.
Anything else from the affirmative team on
I
that
just gave a big
question?
thumbs up to that question.
Okay. Anything else? Then we'll go to the negative team. 2 minutes.
There was a lot of rich content in your question. I wanted to address the social contagion aspect of the question. I think I have a pretty decent handle on what gender identity disorder, or what now called gender dysphoria is, as well as what various variations of sex are. But I have worked with quite a few youth. I used to be an assessor for hormone readiness assessment. And I absolutely can tell you that the majority of people that I saw and assessed didn't have any of the known types of gender dysphoria, which is why I left my role, and we're pushing back on these practices that are eliminating meaningful assessment and an understanding of the conditions being treated.
Okay. Next question.
Hi, you said to introduce yourself. So I'm Lisa Sellen Davis. I call myself a gender culture war reporter. I was going to ask some of those things. I wanted to fact check something really quick that Alice said, 2 things. One was she referenced some research on girls with CAH and that they had these more male typical proclivities, but in what I think is the most often cited study, there was a control group of tomboys with normal hormone levels who were more male typical than the girls with CAH, and that often gets overlooked. And I think you also said that the Fa'afafine and Samoa are facilitated kind of into a female category, and according to Paul Fasey's work, that's not true. Everyone accepts them as male, but a kind of lower down version of male, which I just wrote something about. But you can watch the movie Next Goal Wins. It's a terrible movie, but I watched it on a plane, and the Fa'afafine is playing on the male team. And I wanted to thank Alex for the definition of gender identity as self-sex identification, which I had never thought of. And that's what we mean when we talk about gender identity in this cultural context. So having said that, since we're probably not going to get much more about where should people go in the situations that Holly brought up about prisons and prizes and scholarships, I guess no, we're not going to delve into that. So my question for Alice would be, based on this understanding of gender identity as declaring your own sex to society, what is a non-binary person? Because you brought up non-binary people.
Yeah, I think non-binary, I'm talking about it as a self-identification category. So obviously there are people who identify as non-binary. Forever, people have recognized that there are gender nonconforming children. We could call it sex nonconforming. I'm comfortable using that term as well. But forever, people have recognized that there are some boys who are very girlish and some girls who are very boyish. I think there's reasonable evidence to think there's hormonal influences on that in terms of prenatal brain development, partly because of the way sexual orientation ends up. I think there's good evidence that prenatal hormones can influence sexual orientation development as well as gender identification. Again, what I want to say is that whatever all that science says, the reality of the lived human experience is that you're in this complicated dyad or dialogue occurring between biology and culture, and you're trying your best to make sense of where you fit in all of that. I've written about in my own work the fact that the clinics that treat kids with gender issues are the same clinics that began treating kids with intersex issues. And those clinics have historically had plenty of problems, not least of which is the assumption that everybody should fit as quickly as possible into a category of male or female. And that kind of attitude of almost a panic over getting everybody categorized into one or the other is responsible for, I think, a lot of the mischief that's occurred in all these populations.
Would the affirmative team like to respond?
Sure. I mean, I'd just like to seize on the opportunity to agree with Alice about something. So I think, I mean, I do agree that the research on the play style of XXCAH children provides a lot of evidence that on the one hand, they're more tomboyish, and on the other hand, that it's prenatal exposure to testosterone that's the causal agent. Melissa Hines from Cambridge, the other Cambridge, recently had an excellent review paper on this. Of course, I should also mention that Lisa, the questioner, wrote an entire book about tomboys, so I guess she knows what she's talking about.
Thank you. Next question.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kay. I would like to start off saying that there are lots of scientific divisions which are not meaningful in everyday life. So, for example, division between odd and even numbers. We don't really care what number it is. So, let's focus on the future for a moment. Yeah, I realize that there are some limitations for today. We're limited by perception, how we were raised to divide people into male, female, then transgender and non-binary. But is this division really meaningful in the future? Like, does this division entail moral difference? So we talked a lot about bathrooms today, and women don't feel safe in the bathroom with perceived men. But why? Because we feel like there is certain entitlement for men or for people with one kind of genitalia, for people with another kind of genitalia. But is this what we want for the future? Do we want to be
socialist,
dividing people's moralities based on their contents of their underwear or whatever they're producing? Plus, some people don't produce things, as it was said.
Thank you. Let's start with the affirmative team.
I mean, it might just be important to note that a lot of the gender critical people who are also feminists, the gender critical feminists in particular, I think a lot of their goal is some further future where there is not at least what we would now call a gender distinction, and the sex differences are minor. They're the kind of physiological ones. But they think that what it takes to get to that future of sex equality is to protect women's interests in the short term, now and in the interim, until we get there. So they want sex-separated prisons for so long as there's a higher...
So this one just said that the goal of gender critical people is to achieve a future society that is basically non-binary. Do you guys realize how effed that is? This person just said, you know, our goal eventually, somewhere down the road, is to achieve a society in which there basically are no differences between the sexes. That would all be a really good thing. This person's supposed to be arguing in favor of the gender binary, and this is why this entire thing is effed. And this is why we are going to lose. Because even people who you perceive to be on your side still don't understand. They don't understand the ramifications of what they're talking about. They haven't thought through the ideology that they are at least tacitly buying into. They're saying, at least right now, we have to have separate spaces because things are the way they are right now. But, someday maybe that'll change. Like, no, that should never change. No, that's not what that means. Only people who don't understand spirituality think that that's what that means. That's literally not what that means.
Risk of sexual assault from males. If we get to some wonderful future where there isn't, if that's possible, then maybe we can start talking about having mixed prisons and less high stakes mixed bathrooms and so on. So it's more of a short-term, long-term thing, I would say.
Negative team?
Yeah, what Holly just said made sense, except that I don't think it's a short-term problem, right? Because at the end of the day, a lot of what we're reacting to when we're scared or revolted or anything like that with regard to things that don't fit the categories we're comfortable with is, again, the fact that our brains are working on sex all the time. Except that when you get older, I must say my brain has stopped working on that as hard. I didn't realize how hard my brain was working on it, and menopause has been genuinely liberating. Thank you for that applause. What I would say is that women are always going to reasonably be worried about males having them in spaces where they could be harmed, right? Women are going to reasonably fear rape. They're going to reasonably fear murder. These are reasonable fears, and I don't think they're going to go away.
Sin, can I recommend that spiritual, that's actually just going to create more confusion for that person doesn't understand that we are all right now as human beings a perfect blend of masculine and feminine. So it actually doesn't change from a spiritual perspective. And having these conversations where you're trying, that person does not, and I'm not anything against that person. I'm just saying that person, we are a perfect blend of masculine and feminine right now. Just like we're a perfect blend of masculine and feminine in spirit. It
doesn't undo our need to sort of...
Also, Gnosticism has nothing to do with queer Marxism, and we should never even pretend that it does, because anyone who thinks that Gnosticism has anything to do with queer Marxism has just followed an absolutely retarded and boneheaded fucking take from James Lindsay that is not grounded in reality.
To figure out how to manage competing interests, but it does, I think, help to inform where we're coming from. And I don't want to say those fears are not legitimate. Those fears are absolutely legitimate, but they don't.
People of all kinds should be able to set and establish and hold boundaries.
That was on their end, that wasn't on mine.
And the space that they're in, regardless and without any other justification needed. So my question is, if not gender or sex, regardless of how biological or binary it may be, under what circumstances would it be acceptable for a person or persons to engage in exclusionary behavior? Tickle versus giggle as an example.
Let's start with the negative team this time.
I'm an excellent cook, but I don't let just anybody come to my dinner table, right? In terms of my private behavior, it makes total sense to me that I should be allowed to create those boundaries. Again, where it becomes difficult is the place where we have government funding, an open public space. That's where it begins to become difficult and we get the competing interest problem. So I don't have any problem with the idea of people in private spaces or on apps or something like that creating borders. We should absolutely be allowed to create borders. the challenge becomes in the places like prisons, in the places like public bathrooms. Does that make sense?
I feel like when you just said that you were open to people establishing boundaries, like in apps, for example. So it feels like you just made the case for Tickle versus Giggle in Sal's favor.
Except
Can
that
you
she
elaborate?
says private, right? She's my take.
There are spaces that are challenging because there are spaces that are not quite private and not quite public, right? And that's where the legal issues do become really difficult, because there are places that are in theory open to everyone, but in fact are not open to everyone. And those become, as with free speech, I think, legally challenging in terms of how we work it out.
Alex or Holly, do you want to add anything?
Sure. You also wrote.
Would you mind just commenting on the Tickle versus Giggle case or the social?
I'm afraid I don't know it well enough to comment
or
on
just
it.
the general idea of there being a public social media platform that is biological female only. One.
I'm sorry, say it again.
So not just a private. I think what the question was getting at is like, it's of course in our own home we can do whatever we like. Fine. Like the debate is about the public spaces. Tickle versus Giggle is about there being one social media app that screens out all biological males.
How does it screen them out?
It uses AI and then it backs up 5% manual checking. So
And
do you
think it works?
Support it who cares? In principle, can it be?
Well,
in principle, can it be a female-only app?
Yeah. No, I don't have a problem with the idea that there might be apps set up to be female only and they might choose to keep some people out. But, you know, I don't also have a problem with the idea that we might create children's spaces where we keep sexual predators out, right? There are some things with regard to, we can make reasonable decisions with regard to issues of, for example, safety that strike me as reasonable decisions.
Do you think, is it okay to make a decision about safety, talking about all males, just the statistical risk is different, so all males, including trans women? Because that's the issue. All males.
I guess
regardless of
I'd like
gender
to hear what Aaron has to say about that, because I don't think I've thought that through carefully enough. And one of the things
I don't have the lived experience to answer that question.
to do is not have a knee-jerk response to things I haven't thought through carefully enough. And I would hope we all do that. So,
Aaron, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, there are a lot of emotions on all sides of this, right? And we can't make emotional decisions when it comes to policy. We have to rely on evidence. We do have evidence that men on average are bigger, stronger, faster. We have evidence that males are more likely to commit violence and sexual assaults. This is evidence, right? So I think whenever possible, when we have evidence and we can improve on evidence, that's what needs to guide our decisions, not people's feelings. There are people who are uncomfortable with gender nonconformity. There are people who are uncomfortable. And I mean, should my use of bathrooms be entirely dependent on comfort, or should it be based on measures of safety?
But surely, if I wanted to establish a physical boundary with someone over here, that person wouldn't need to, or it would be unreasonable for that person to say, give me the statistics, the proof to, demonstrate that it's worthy for you to have that boundary.
So are you talking about personal boundaries or societally imposed boundaries?
In fairness to other people who want to ask questions, can you, I'll give you a few seconds to respond, and then you can perhaps continue it in private after the public event. Did you want to finish with a few words, Aaron?
Well, I just needed clarity about whether you're talking about personal boundaries versus boundaries set by policy for public in general. I mean, personal boundaries, of course, we're allowed to set personal boundaries anytime with any person. But I think when we're setting policy, we need to rely on evidence.
Okay, thank you very much.
They literally just can't say, yes, we're okay with there being one app, just one fucking app, that is all biological female. If you are not a biological female, you can use literally every other app. We just want one app. And neither of them can say, yeah, we're okay with that.
Next question.
I got probably two questions, and I'll try to be real quick. I am a male. My name's Don Lamp. MIT graduate, supposedly had some brains before I got old. I'm a male. I'm in the red box. I wasn't assigned male at birth. I don't identify as a male. I'm a male. It's ontological. And I just wonder whether folks like myself are permitted to do that, or whether there'd be an inference that we will engage in some sort of policing behavior that people aren't like us. I mean, there were some values in this country at one time where let people do what they want to do, respect them, have compassion. And that seems to be out the window for people who really want to understand what's going on, but aren't going to buy into, sex as a social construct. So I wonder whether me being declaratorily a male is wrong, that I ought to go through some other process of self-reconciliation, or whether it's okay for me to be a male.
Who wants to start?
I'll start. In the early days when people started taking hormones and transitioning, and it at no point did it ever occur to me that our very concept of what biological sex is would be dismantled. What we were asking for is some legal wiggle room in order to provide us with some safety, and we're talking about very small numbers of people with diagnosable conditions. I absolutely disagree with what's happening in terms of dismantling our systems and our very understanding of what biological sex is. I don't think that's necessary for me to have rights and to move through the world.
Yeah, that answer.
I just have two quick points. One, I know you're male because you said you were in the red box. And secondly, you said you weren't assigned male at birth.
I was not. That's a fiction.
In fact, somebody put an M on your birth certificate,
Well,
right?
because they observed who I
Well,
was.
they probably didn't.
Well, I
they
trusted
didn't
them,
biopsy
okay?
your-
In retrospect, I trusted what they did.
Hang on. They didn't biopsy your testes. I'm guessing they probably also didn't check to see if you had ovaries in addition.
Are
They
you
probably-
suggesting that sort of invasive surgical procedure be conducted on every baby?
Absolutely not. And that's why I'm
You're
saying
telling
you were
me-
assigned male.
I was assigned male because they wouldn't
You were assigned
they
male
wouldn't
because you
take
appeared to
surgery
be
and do
male.
hormone tests. So I was assigned male. Is that
Ev-
right?
Every time a baby has a sex indicated on their birth certificate, somebody has done an assignment.
But they're usually
Usually it's right.
They're usually right. That's really important, right?
What if I was
Usually it's
born in a
right.
nation that didn't have a birth certificate and I found out later in life I was male? I mean, a lot of these arguments are just way too much. And the other comment I want to make, which is maybe I'll address it over here.
Look
I
how
know I'm taking
dismissive
my
she just
time.
got.
But to me, a lot of this is based on the logical fallacy of the numerator problem, which is you take some people that are profoundly affected, however few, and then say social policy needs to be made for a statistically insignificant number of victims, and everybody else has to go along with it. And that's anti-democratic and it's anti-scientific, in my opinion. Maybe, Alex, you can say something about it.
Sure. I mean, you're definitely male. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Although, I mean, I should point out that these guys are responsible for like 95% of the homicides worldwide. But I mean, one thing that I think Holly and I agree about is that yes, for a very small number of people living as their natal sex, as their sex, is just not feasible, and they achieve some psychological relief by living as the other sex, and these people deserve respect just like anyone else.
Yeah, maybe one thing to note just on the small numbers, if the policy we're talking about is anti-discrimination policy, then I think it wouldn't matter how small the numbers are. Like people can be very few in number, but have a terrible experience, and it's good to do something about that.
Well, I condemn discrimination of any kind.
Okay, we have to move on. We've got a lot more questions, but I was told we have time for only 2 more questions. Here's what I'd like to propose, that everybody who's standing at a microphone can briefly ask a question, and then I will let each of the debaters have 1 minute to respond to whatever they choose to among all of those points. But that way, all of your points will be in play. And I see that encourage somebody else to come to the microphone. But let's quickly, please, as briefly as you can state your questions.
My name is Dan. I think this is mostly for Aaron. So I'm going to read the definition of gender identity from Planned Parenthood, which seems to be the pithiest definition of gender identity as we seem to understand it in the culture. Gender identity is how you feel inside and how you express your gender through clothing, behavior, and personal appearance. Aaron, you seem to be rejecting that. And instead, you seem to be embracing this idea that gender does come from something actually scientific. And if that's the case, then isn't gender biological? And does this not mean that the idea that gender is a social construct is actually not true? That gender is just as real as sex, but maybe slightly different?
Thank you. Next question.
Alice, you made a statement when you were distinguishing between male and female characteristics. And among other things, you mentioned that, well, there were different mental outlooks and different choices of professions. And I wonder if you can elaborate on that. And if that is correct, does that sort of undermine the arguments for disparate impact?
Next question.
Good evening. My name is Alex. Thank you for coming. So I hope we can agree that sexual dimorphism was selected for evolutionarily in the adaptive landscape somewhere in the antecedents of humanity. And that is a reality that is difficult to deny, that sexual dimorphism was selected for. And it was said earlier by the opposition that the sexual binary and the adherence to this definition creates something called hostile sex definitions. And I'm concerned that if we detach ourselves from the ability to start from reality and then craft a humane social policy from that reality, as in how do we integrate social policy to allow people to come to terms with their reality rather than saying this reality is hostile, we might be kind of heading down the road into what Greg Lukianoff calls reverse cognitive behavioral therapy, which is to say, essentially training them to feel that reality could be harmful to them. And of course, reality can be harmful to you. That's what evolutionary adaptation is. We're adapting to our reality. So if you have a divergence from sexual dimorphism, I think our goal should be to craft social policy that allows you to meaningfully adapt that divergence into a humane and livable, comfortable, adaptive reality.
Thank you. Next.
Thanks. Yeah, so most of the discussion so far has been about using sex or not in social policy and what the harms might be there. So I just wanted to ask about whether, especially this team, recognizes any potential harms for the ways in which gender identity is used in social policy, or would be more. So like when I recently applied to a conference, you have to suggest, pick your gender, and there's a whole list. And one of them is gender non-conforming woman. That's one of the options. So then it seems like when I pick woman, I am somehow, I don't know, I'm saying I'm a gender conforming woman, which I guess I kind of am in lots of ways. I'm not in other ways. And like in the I Am Jazz book that's given to small children, it's very clearly said that like the fact that jazz prefers ballet to baseball is evidence that of jazz's gender identity, and it's like a normal thing to say at a philosophy conference. Many people have told me this, who are females dressed as feminine as me, who tell me that they part of how they learn that they're not really women and they're instead non-binary people is because of their aggression or ambition or things like that. So I was just wondering whether this team worries that we're sort of going backwards in terms of putting people into social boxes if we don't want to put them into biological boxes.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you all very much for being here today. Big fan of all of you. My question is mainly for Professor Dreger. Big fan of Galileo's middle finger, by the way, as well as your stand for academic freedom at Northwestern. On the account that you expressed today, and this question also kind of dovetails with the question from Lisa Sellen Davis. On the account that you expressed today, would you say that lesbians or gay men or otherwise gender nonconforming people are less female or male than their straight counterparts or gender conforming counterparts, based on the kind of data points that when you were referring to, for example, CAH and gender nonconforming behavior and occupations? Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you to all of you for being here. Can we say that, and I'm trying to make sense of all of this, can we say that sex exists on a spectrum with female on one side and male on the other, and with human generation or human life vying for one or the other, sometimes mixing them? And so essentially, wouldn't you say that human life is still striving for one or the other? And you can say sex is on the spectrum, but also binary.
Okay, one more question.
Thank you. So coming from a more kind of policy perspective, for spaces or programs which do involve government regulation in some way, who should decide what the gender sex segregation should look like, and how should they go about that decision? For example, Dr. Smith-Langford mentioned some cases where passing might be matters, such as for jobs or awards, and some cases where like trans versus cis status should matter, such as for prisons. How should these cases be decided, and who should decide, who passes, who's legitimately trans, those kinds of questions?
Thank you all very much for these great questions. With apologies to everybody, the speakers are not going to be able to answer them all, but I'll give them each 1 minute to address whichever subsection of what's been asked they choose to. And why don't we just start in that order? Alex, Holly, Aaron, and Alice.
Okay, there's so much there. I'll just pick one at random, the sex is a spectrum question. So even if it turned out sex is not a spectrum, but even if it turned out that sex is a spectrum, still sex could be important for social policy, better to use in many cases than gender identity. For example, weight is on a spectrum, but that doesn't stop weight from being important when it comes to boxing classes. Holly?
Yeah, so two things. One on the last question about who decides, especially where it's governments making policy. I think the important thing is just to take all stakeholders' interests seriously, and that's really not happening in some countries. It's certainly not happening in Australia. Really, it's like just see who you think is the most oppressed according to the modern intersectionality pyramid, and then only care about their interests and don't worry about anyone else. If that stopped, it would be enormous.
I love her.
And then just
let her talk the whole
near
time.
the end on this side, and who talked about whether it's sort of sex or gender, like whether we've been talking too much about sex, but really we should be talking about gender identity. And I think I have been, and maybe it's caused a little cross-talking, and Alice, you pointed that out earlier, and I think that's right. I think the gender critical feminist goal is to rescue the sex-gender distinction, and it doesn't actually matter that much what the sex. There's room for arguing. Aaron's view might be right there. Maybe there's an even more flexible view of what sex is that can plug in there. So long as we can make sense of the history of how female people with some latitude have been treated. We've got gender on the external understanding, the treatment. We've got the people who've been treated. I've got everything I need. I don't need to talk about gametes, maybe. So I think that's kind of like important and can be causing a little cross-talking in some of these debates when we then try to bring the science together with the feminism or the policy discussion.
I wanted to answer the question about just defining gender identity a little bit better. It's important to remember that when Stoller coined the term, gender was synonymous with sex, and it was long before identity politics. So really all it meant was an awareness of sex. I think that term has been very corrupted by identity politics and postmodernism. Separate from the word gender being synonymous with sex, I really don't understand what the word gender means. I think I am masculinized because I was exposed to testosterone. That's a biological issue. It doesn't make me male, but it makes me very masculine to the degree that I think some legal wiggle room has been helpful for me. But in terms of what gender has come to mean, to me, that's a meaningless term.
I feel like this guy. I feel like this guy is like. He obviously had experiences with this. He obviously had experiences with like, abnormalities that were not his fault when he was born, right? And it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like this guy could be like Buck Angel if he just tuned in more to what the gender people are doing, but he's not doing that because he had these experiences and he wants other people to be taken care of as well. You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of people on the left who go along with this stuff, I feel like it's because they've had negative experiences like Chase Oliver. Chase Oliver was a young gay boy. He doesn't want other people to struggle the way he did as a young gay boy, and that's why he thinks the way he does about some of this stuff. Like, you get this guy who, maybe is born a girl, but maybe was exposed to a higher than normal level like dose of testosterone, and that created problems, and I can certainly understand that as a girl who has never been a girly girl my entire life. I get this. I'm not, it's in quite like don't have a beard or anything like that, but like I get this, okay? And so it's like, that it's kind of like one of those things where it's like I think a lot of people on the left are just trying to do good and they want people to have it better than they did, and they don't want any of this socialist bullshit. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we basically shit on those people just because they're on the left without taking the time to understand why they believe what they do, and just shit on them and call them groomers and pedophiles and like all those. This is why I absolutely detest what James Lindsay's done on the right. This is why I absolutely detest what I see in conservative circles all the time, in that they're turning so many people who could legitimately be on our side away. The number one goal that we always should have had was waking up people on the left and showing them what was really going on. But then no, it becomes this big fucking morality police issue on the right where like everyone thinks that they're surrounded by pedophiles at all times and is, calling people out for this regardless of whether or not it's true, and have completely overused the term groomer and pedophile so that they literally mean nothing anymore. It's just sad. Angel Eyes, thank you so much for the super chat. I really do enjoy it. Very interesting and informative as always. Hey guys, if you enjoyed the stream today, we are about to wrap up, but if you've enjoyed the stream, show your love with the super chat. If you enjoyed it, for $5 super chat or something like that, I would really appreciate it if people could get in the habit of doing that. That would be awesome. But if you want to support the work I'm doing on a regular basis, head over to carlin.substack.com. The link is in the description below. Make sure you sign up for the Substack. $8 a month, $80 a year. That's where you're going to get the best perks. And I am completely funded by you, so I would appreciate it. Make sure you mount the like button on the way out the door as we finish up. Let's listen to the last couple of minutes.
Those were so many great questions. I feel the desire to answer them all and obviously can't. Sex is not simply a spectrum because sex is made up of so many different things when we drill down into it. Some of them exist on a spectrum. So for example, hormones are a spectrum, and you can go from a male typical to a female typical and have variations. And actually over the course of our lives, we do vary in terms of those cocktails. Breast development is on a spectrum. Genital phallic development from the clitoris to the penis is on a spectrum. That's the same organ, and how it develops depends on the hormonal cocktail, as well as some other things in terms of development. But the SRY gene, it's either there or it's not there. So that's a binary sex element. Generally, in terms of gonads, most people have ovaries or testes, but some people have ovotestes, which is actually a blend of both types of tissues. And it's a single organ, by the way. And then some people also have gonadal agenesis. So there's not a simple way to answer that. Women with AIS have brains that are more female than female typical people because they actually have no response to androgens. And women like me, who have a female typical body, actually do respond to androgens. So I have body hair, I have, my brain responded to androgens in my development, which for a CAS woman who has testes and XY chromosomes, that doesn't happen. So sex is a many-layered thing, and some of it is on a kind of spectrum, and some of it is more dimorphic. It's worth understanding that stuff. But at the end of the day, you live where you live, right?
Okay. I'd like to thank the audience for great questions, the speakers for great presentations, and Alex and Holly get the closing word. I think they want to make
Oh
a
yeah,
little.
thanks. Yeah, so we have a little gift for Alice and Aaron. It's a slightly awkward because Alice doesn't like sex boxes and Aaron just said that he's female. But I think we'll just go with the no. We'll just go with the superficial appearances. So pink for Alice and blue for.
Thank you very much. That closes the presentation.
All right. I guess that's it. That could have actually been a lot more painful than it was, if I'm being quite honest. Let me just look at I just want to look at the videos on this channel real quick. What other videos do they have on here? Is there anything else on here? Oh shit, he lectured at MIT? Yo, that's the guy that was against the vax. So that is actually that's something. Glenn Lowry. Wow. Okay. Okay. All right. All right, Free Speech Alliance. Is STEM systemically racist? Wow. Okay. All right. Not hating this. Don't hate this at all. All right, guys, that's going to wrap up our stream for today. I appreciate you spending some time with me. Again, we will not be doing nothing remotely controversial tonight and may never do it again. And I guess we'll just have to see how that works out. But I will be back tomorrow regardless because I don't abandon things on a whim. And so I will be back tomorrow. And in the meantime, you can find me over on my Substack, Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. I'm going to be doing some writing there and some work over there and some work on some other projects for a little bit tonight. So, pop over there. You may get some updates. And yeah, and I'm not going to comment anymore on the show right now. And yeah, we are going to yeah. Okay, that's all I have. That's all I have. All right. I will see people tomorrow in the Wednesday community Zoom. By the way, guys, supporters, if you're a supporter of my work on Substack or Locals, we do a community Zoom call on Wednesday at noon, just to get people who can do it in the day rather than at night. So if you want to join that, head over to the Substack, click on the Unwoke Roundup email. Scroll all the way down to the bottom underneath that red box for supporters. You will find a Zoom link for Wednesday and for Mondays as well. That's where the Zoom links normally are. I will be posting the information in Locals as well. That's all I have for right now, guys. Take care. Have a good one. We'll see you soon. Bye.